Tomorrow is Tuesday, November 5th, Election Day in the United States. The race is neck and neck between the former President Donald Trump and the Democratic challenger, the Vice President of the incumbent administration, Kamala Harris. To talk about the implications of this race and Armenian American priorities, we have with us next Gev Iskajyan. He is the National Grassroots Director of the ANCA and familiar to us from his testimonies living through the blockade of Artsakh. So with no further ado, let's go to Gev. Gev, welcome to Hairenik.
Thanks for having me on.
Gev, I'd like to start off with the news we got over the weekend that Republican candidate Trump had spoken by phone on Trump's initiative, reportedly, to the Catholicos Aram I of the Holy See of Cilicia, who we recently hosted in our studios for an interview during his Eastern Region pontifical tour. Gev, do you have any insight as to how this call came about?
Allison, I think more than anything, this is a testament to the importance of the Armenian community, not just during this election cycle, but in general in the American political landscape. Now, as you know, we have over 200,000 Armenian Americans in battleground states, especially in places like Michigan and Pennsylvania that are going to be hotly contested. I think this is part of an overture by the Trump campaign to reach out to the Armenian American community ahead of the election, and not only to see where we stand and what our concerns are, but to also have some type of dialogue. And while we welcome it, which we do, and as we welcome statements from both sides of the aisle, whether it comes from Vice President Harris or former President Trump, we want to make sure that our presidential candidates, especially as they vie for our votes, are held accountable to what they are saying, to the promises that they are making. I think this overture, in terms of reaching out to the Vehapar, to speak to the Armenian community, to speak, in essence, to the Armenian diaspora, was part of that effort. I think that the Trump campaign, actually, I think both campaigns see us as a vital part of their electoral effort. And as I mentioned, we have key swing states: Michigan, over 50,000 Armenian Americans; Pennsylvania, tens of thousands of Armenian Americans. When you're talking about margins, if you've looked at the recent polling, 1-2%, those are the margins where we are even more impactful. If a few hundred votes can sway an election, then tens of thousands of Armenian American votes can definitely sway an election.
And what did the Catholicos convey on the phone to a presidential hopeful Trump that Armenian Americans are expecting?
He conveyed, first and foremost, the thing that is on the minds of most Armenians, whether in the homeland or throughout the diaspora. And that's the issue of Artsakh. As our listeners know, just about a year ago, the entire population of Artsakh was ethnically cleansed. Armenians lost their homeland that they lived on for thousands of years. This is a major issue for us. This runs front and center. So the Catholicos made sure to address this point, to talk about the right of return for Armenians, to talk about the plight of Armenians today who are still under threat by Azerbaijan. And additionally, as you know, we've had many promises by many presidents before. Unfortunately, not many of them have materialized. What we also want, and what the Catholicos has conveyed, is Armenian representation within the realms of power, within those decision-making rooms. So we want to see Armenian representation. We want to see Artsakh centered. And I think that is what the Catholicos conveyed very strongly and very diligently.
Understood, and thank you for the big picture on the, the role of Armenian Americans could play in these swing states. But this call was quite unique. Of course, both campaigns are actively working to convince voters of their message in the swing states, it does seem like the Trump campaign is a little bit different. It has really focused on various Middle Eastern communities, especially in Michigan. To what do you attribute this very specific outreach, Gev?
I think that they, one, have an acute understanding of the importance of the Armenian American community in the geographic locations that we talked about in these key battleground states. But I also think a part of it is the critical mass that we've built as a community, whether it is in terms of our advocacy, whether it's in terms of PR, whether it is in terms of working with candidates that now are seen as surrogates or key level stakeholders in both campaigns. For example, if you look at folks like RFK, if you look at folks like Tulsi Gabbard, if you look at folks like Vivek, all of whom have been on a national stage, all of whom have run for president, and all of whom who have very, very vocally talked about the Armenia and Artsakh issue at every turn that they can get. So these are folks that the Armenian plight didn't just come to them delivered in a package. These are folks that we have worked with, we have cultivated relationships with, we have helped platform because they have platformed our issues on the national stage. Now, as they are part of these larger presidential campaigns, now as they are key stakeholders in those campaigns, as we see on the Trump side, the Armenian issue is in that room. It is in where these decisions are being made. The Armenian issue is being talked about within those halls of power.
Now, Trump, of course, last time around appointed John Bolton, who was very publicly pressuring Armenia to compromise on Artsakh and prioritize, rather, relations with Turkey and Azerbaijan. Do we have any indications from the Trump team that we could expect anything different in regards to personnel the second time around?
When it comes to folks like Bolton, we know that Trump is vehemently against reappointing him to any type of national security role. But additionally, both Trump and Kamala Harris have had the chance to stand up for Artsakh, to stand up for Armenia, to put their words into action. Unfortunately, we haven't seen that. In 2020, as you know, during the war in Artsakh, Donald Trump stated on a rally stage that he would be supporting Armenia. He's going to, quote unquote, try to do something for them. Additionally, Kamala Harris has come out in terms of making statements about the right of return, which we welcome, but at the same time, the ethnic cleansing for which the right of return that we're talking about happened under the watch of their administration. So we are very wary of the fact that sometimes presidential candidates, actually a lot of times presidential candidates, are going to say what the voters want to hear. What we want to do is ensure that there's methods of accountability. Now that we have these statements, now that we have these campaign promises, it is going to be on us the next 4 years, regardless of who the presidential candidate is, to hold them accountable to their own words. Additionally, what we want to see are folks who understand the plight of Artsakh, who understand how important it is to American diplomacy, how important it is to the notion of America in terms of what we believe in and what we stand for. We want folks that understand that in the halls of power, in the administrations, in the cabinets. So part of our appeal to these presidential candidates has been like, besides giving us your words and your promises, show us action. Show us that the Armenian American voice will be represented when decisions are made.
Understood. I thought it was quite interesting, just the fact that Trump was phoning up the Catholicos rather than the Armenian government, for example. And that was a very, in my view, direct outreach to the Armenian diaspora. I'd like to shift a little bit to the Democratic side. The Biden-Harris administration has often chafed at criticism of its foreign policy, not only when it comes to the Armenian community, but other Middle Eastern communities. The USAID AID chief Samantha Power. Armenian Americans took note of her inaction during the blockade, and yet it seemed that the criticisms were very, met with hostility. Has Harris sought to differentiate herself in these final months and weeks on the campaign trail? What is her message? What is she saying could be different or not?
So what we've welcomed that Vice President Harris has said have been her statements on the Artsakh right of return. We see that as a key issue for us as a demographic, as a community. So in that sense, we welcome it. We commend those welcomed remarks. However, we want to see action. And action doesn't just have to be when they take office. Both of these people, both Vice President Harris and former President Trump, are major figures in their political party. We have a lame duck session until the next president takes their oath. In that session, they have the power and the authority to urge members of Congress on their sides of the aisle, on both sides of the aisle, to pass forward these key pieces of legislation that we have, whether it's in terms of applying Magnitsky sanctions on Azerbaijan, whether it is in terms of repealing a waiver that allows the United States to send military aid to Azerbaijan, whether it is calling for the release of all the Armenian political prisoners currently held in Baku. They do not have to wait until after the election. They do not have to wait until their oaths have been taken. They can get to work on that now. And that's what we're asking, that type of commitment, that type of diligence.
For those of us not familiar with the workings on Capitol Hill, are lame duck sessions a time when representatives might take risks? What do you think are the chances that we could see passage of some of that legislation you were speaking about?
We think that there's opportunity there for many folks who have been hesitant or shy to vote on certain things, and especially those who have alluded to the upcoming election as part of that decision-making process. They now have the chance to vote with their conscience, not because of political expediency, not because what they think might be the best for their party or for their candidacy, but they have the ability now to vote with their conscience without any strings attached. We are going to work for and we are going to urge them to do that in this upcoming session.
And what congressional level races does the ANC have their eyes on? Are there any pro-Armenian candidates that you're excited about that you could speak to?
Yes, while the ANC has not endorsed a presidential candidate because of the shortcomings, whether it was in 2020 or in 2023, that both administrations had some complicity in, we do have over 80 members of Congress and Senate who have been steadfast supporters of the ANCA and the Armenian cause, who we are very excited about, who we are encouraging Armenian American voters to vote for. And that extends across the aisle, and that it also extends from Congress to Senate. For example, Congressman Adam Schiff, who has been one of the most vociferous supporters of the Armenian cause, who's been a congressman in a heavily Armenian district for a long time, is now running for Senate in California. That is a major position. That is something that we are excited about. That's something that we're behind. On the other side of things, for example, on the Republican or congressional side, we have highly influential members of Congress like Tom McClintock from California, who's a Republican, who is running to secure his seat. We need to make sure that Congressman McClintock stays in his seat so that we can do what we do on a legislative level. So across the board, we have very important Senate and congressional races. And I urge everybody to go to anca.org to see who we've endorsed, especially for folks that are representing the districts that you live in.
Certainly, we will include the link to that page in our show notes and our YouTube description, so our viewers can keep an eye out for that. Another question, looking forward, how will the ANCA be proceeding regardless of who is elected tomorrow? In regards, let's perhaps first talk about your programs in the heart of Washington, D.C. For youth entering public service.
Yes. So I think it's important to look at ANCA's advocacy through two lenses. One is the immediate lens, and that would include the political landscape that we live in today. And that includes, obviously, the talk of the town, the major news today, which is the presidential election that comes tomorrow. We have been heavily engaged in that process, reaching out to surrogates from both campaigns, making sure that the Artsakh issue is platformed and is brought to the national stage, which to some degree we've seen. You have two people vying to be the most powerful person on earth, mentioning Artsakh by name, calling for the right of return, speaking on these issues. So to elevate that on the national stage has been part of our, working process. That was a major part of our goal during this election. However, we understand that our future does not hinge on any single candidate, and our strength as a community, as an Armenian American lobby, is solely reliant on what we can build upon from today till the future. And we are heavily invested in the future. This year alone, Allison, we had over 100 youth come to Washington, D.C. We have the Armenian House, which is, to me, a treasure and a absolute force when it comes to us building power. The Armenian House in Washington, D.C. hosts youth from all across the country for various programs, whether it's high school programs like the Summer Academy program, whether it's college programs like the Gev Iskajyan program, whether it's postgraduate programs like the Capital Gateway program that helps get people jobs in Washington, D.C., that helps put people in the Hill, that helps put people in these rooms where decisions are made. And we are huge on Armenian American representation. Folks can agree or disagree with the ANC on a litany of issues, but I think it's very, very tough to disagree on the fact that we need more Armenian representation across the board in the halls of power in the United States. That is what we are actively working on. That is what we are currently heavily invested in. And an example I'd like to show you, for example, if you went back to the early 2000s and you were to ask how many staffers that work on the Hill for congressmen, for senators that are of Armenian origin, someone would tell you a number between like 5, 10, and 15. Today, we have close to 50 staffers of Armenian origin that are in the Hill, that are working there, that are in these offices. They are people that at the very least represent us, come from our background, understand the lens that we've seen this world through, and understand the Armenian American experience. And the reason that we've seen that influx in the last 20 years are precisely because of programs like Capital Gateway. What Capital Gateway does, essentially, we tell young folks who've just graduated college who want to work in politics, but they don't know where to go, they don't know how to do it. We say, you are going to come to Washington, D.C., we're going to provide you housing. We're going to provide you training. We're going to help set you up with internships, mentorship programs, and guidance and you can stay here until you find a place in Washington, D.C. I think in the long term, that is the game that we're playing. And every day, as we continue to work towards that, every day we become a little bit stronger.
Well, Azerbaijan certainly played the long game when it came to seizing Artsakh, so I'm very pleased to hear that the ANCA is taking such a long view about our struggle. So thank you so much, Gev, for your time, and let's see what happens tomorrow. I'm sure you will be keeping up the pressure no matter who is in office.
Whatever the outcome is tomorrow, we're going to be up working the next day to make sure that whoever wins is held accountable to their words.
Thank you so much, Gev. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Now let's shift gears to the international stage. On November 11th, Azerbaijan will be hosting the premier UN Climate Change Summit called COP29. There have been protests by Armenians all around the world. But let's go to Yerevan to hear about what actions are being taken on the ground in the Armenian capital. Nare, in recent weeks and months, we've been seeing protests around the world and online regarding Azerbaijan's hosting of COP29. Not only Armenians, of course, but environmentalists concerned that a petrostate is hosting the premier UN climate event. What's been going on in Yerevan in regards to activism over this conference?
Yerevan, there was a big rally that started in front of the United Nations office in Yerevan, and then proceeded to hold a protest in front of the Foreign Ministry of Armenia, and then visited all three Minsk group countries' embassies, Russia, France, and the United States. The protesters were joined, and the activists were joined by a number of MPs from Hayastan Dashing, including Lilith Galsyan, Garnik Danielian. Anna Grigoryan also joined, made a speech. And the demands were to hold Azerbaijan accountable, to stop the international community's indifference in regards to Armenian hostages. And with this protest, Yerevan joined the global movement against Azerbaijan hosting COP29.
Very good. So that protest, as we can see, they were holding the photos of the Artsakh political and military elite. We just got news today that the International Committee of the Red Cross was able to visit all of the Armenians who Azerbaijan has admitted to holding captive, but they remain in captivity in Baku, and Azerbaijan shows no inclination that they're willing to set them free. Nare, what about the Armenian government? As we know, the Armenian government did actually endorse Azerbaijan's holding of this conference. Of course, one of the motivations was that Azerbaijan was offering hostages in exchange for Armenia's endorsement. What is Armenia's position today? What is the Armenian government's, rather, position on this today?
Yes, Armenian government claims that in exchange for the endorsement, they got 32 Armenian hostages released. But in reality, when the endorsement occurred, they said that this was just a gesture of goodwill, that they were building trust with the country, with which normalization seems to be, according to Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan, the number one priority. So in regards to this endorsement, and the claims about the POW's release, it should be noted that the POW's release was already in the agreement from 2020, the trilateral agreement, and it should not be a subject of negotiations. Armenia has released all its POWs from Azerbaijan and continues to release any new ones that we get from the clashes on the border or from any such incidents. So it seems to me also Armenian government has been invited to this COP29 event, and according to Foreign Minister Mirzoyan, they remain undecided if they are going to take part, but he said that they don't rule out this possibility.
Understood. I saw other comments from lower down figures in the Pashinyan administration that there was more the question of at what level representation should be sent. So we'll keep an eye on that. There certainly seems to be a disconnect between feelings in the streets and that the government is plunging ahead with its normalization program. Another story, speaking of Foreign Minister Ararat Mirzoyan, that's been gaining attention in the diaspora are his recent comments that Armenia is no longer prioritizing genocide recognition. Nare, could you explain how did this come up and what were the foreign minister's exact words?
When discussing the 2025 budget, Foreign Minister Mirzoyan said that the number one priority for the Armenian government is normalization with Azerbaijan, and so genocide recognition is no longer the priority. So he said that the tragic events of history should be studied by historians, which is a long time requirement of normalization with Turkey. Turkey has always tied normalization with Armenia, not only to the recognition of Artsakh as Azerbaijan, but also to the stop of pursuit of genocide recognition. So this was essentially Armenia fulfilling this wish, which is ironic considering that Mirzoyan himself was an employee of the Armenian Genocide Museum.
Indeed, and certainly that's a line that many of us in the diaspora are familiar with, Turkey's insistence that the matter be left to historians, although historians have reached a consensus that it was indeed genocide. I also take note that the Minister of Economy said that Armenia is prioritizing the economy over national identity now. Although Pashinyan himself has acknowledged that Azerbaijan seems to still be pursuing an aggressive policy against Armenia, regardless of what Armenia gives. Nare, could you talk about Pashinyan's recent acknowledgement of Azerbaijan's unwillingness to participate in what he calls a crossroads of peace?
The Minister of Economy claims that for the longest time Armenia has been pursuing the wrong priority. According to him, security comes when investments come, and this government is that set on pursuing the policy of getting investments from its two antagonist states, Turkey and Azerbaijan. Even as Prime Minister Pashinyan himself admitted that Azerbaijan plans to make use of all the roads that Armenia is making available for it, while trying to leave Armenia under siege, under this economic blockade.
Indeed, and we've certainly seen firsthand the repercussions of those handovers, most recently in Tavush in the northeast of Armenia. Now, of course, the Prime Minister continues to engage with the Russian-led Eurasian Economic Union, where the Russian president recently highlighted record trade between Armenia and Russia. The Armenian government has, despite this growth, gotten into major debt. It has more than doubled under Pashinyan's rule, and so we see the response, it seems, has been raising prices in different sectors. Perhaps, Nara, you can speak a little bit about the latest methods that the government is seeking to recoup its record spending.
Armenia is pursuing the policy of increasing taxes, of increasing property tax, of increasing the transportation fees. As the debt grows, inflation is on the rise, and the salaries are unable to keep up. And the only economic growth that we've seen was thanks to its ties with Russia. Indeed, the trade has grown more than 2.5 times for the first 6 months, and Russia remains the number one investor in Armenia. So any economic gains that this government can claim are not in any way due to this process of normalization, which has resulted in increased food insecurity, in the ethnic cleansing of Artsakh, and is probably likely going to result in many losses in the energy sector as well.
So all of this comes against the backdrop of fresh repressions in the country. Nare, can you tell us about the latest round of arrests in Armenia? Who is being targeted?
Recently, 9 activists of Sarpazan movement, and some which are not even affiliated, but are just critics of this government, were arrested, and their car was searched. All claiming that these activists were in possession of illegal arms, which the search showed nothing, and they were released. But the true reason, the only thing that they were able to find was the posters. So there is reason
What
enough.
posters were those?
Those posters were against the National Assembly President, Alen Simonian, which I guess is reason enough, ground enough for Pashinyan regime to arrest a citizen.
So they, as I understand, were their cars were searched on suspicion of possessing weapons. Those weapons turned out to be critical posters, and they were detained nonetheless. As we know, the example, one of these people was a Harvard graduate who actually translated Why Nations Fail by one of the latest Nobel Prize winners, and actually who was of Armenian origin. And that seems to be the quality of the people that are actually, finding themselves on the wrong end of the political spectrum. Thank you so much, Nare, for that update. And let's keep an eye on activism as we approach COP29 to be held in Baku. And of course, we hope that all of this activism can make a dent and we could see the release of our hostages. Thank you, Nare. Thank you all for joining us on this week's newscast, and we will be with you again next Monday for more updates. By then, we'll know who is the President of the United States, and we'll be into COP29, and we will see what goes on as activists continue to challenge Azerbaijan's hosting of this premier climate event.